So today we're going to learn about deponent verbs. And the key piece to remember about this is that for these type of verbs, we're not learning any new type of endings. Okay? It's all endings we've learned before. All we have to do is just recognize which verbs are deponent. And remember that when we see these verbs, we're going to have to say this tagline to ourselves. So, dicamus nunc, passive in form, active in meaning. Passive in form, active in meaning. Deco, passive in form. Dekiss, active in meaning. Passive in form. I hope some of you took me up on that, and if you did, I apologize for any strange looks you're getting from neighbors, either in the library or in your dorm, or wherever you choose to take in these delightfully amusing and enjoyable videos. All right, moving on. So, examples. Always going to start with some examples. Look at these sentences and try and translate them yourselves. One thing you might hopefully be weirded out by is the presence of one specific case in these sentences, given the fact that the verbs look passive. Pause the video if you want to try and guess, or think about that as you translate. But I'm going to move on. So pause the video to both translate and to guess which case seems weird. And then we will take a look at the meanings, okay? All right, here are the meanings. Hopefully you pointed out that it's weird to have accusatives with passive verbs. Because normally passive verbs, what receives the action of the verb with a passive verb? The subject. The subject normally receives the action, right? Like you're used to seeing woke a bar, I was being called, I being the subject. So you're not going to have a direct object because the subject's already receiving the action. So these accusatives can tip you off that there's something weird going on with the passive verb at the end of the sentence. And what's weird is that they are deponents. And we can tell by when we look at them up in the dictionary, they all of their principal parts look passive. Just looking at the translations real quick. The brave man delayed the enemies, and you were fearing the gods. Notice it's pretty easy to recognize this as being imperfect. This is the perfect passive form we've normally used, and in both cases, this is the imperfect passive. We're going to translate these verbs as active. And why is that? Because they are deponent. Deco, passive in form. Dekiss, active in meaning. I hope you don't forget that. We're going to be doing that a lot next class, so get ready for it. We want to hammer this idea into our heads. Deponent verbs, passive in form, active in meaning. All right, let's take a look at those principal parts I laid out because they do look a little bit odd, right? We're going to delete this real quick. What I want us to do is take a look at them and see in what ways they differ from verbs we might be more used to seeing, right? So hopefully some of you may have realized which of these principal parts is least represented here. It's this one, yeah, wokawi. And why, keeping in mind, why might this form not be needed with deponent verbs? Genius point for someone who can explain it to themselves. Pause the video if you want more time to think of it. That's because this form is only ever used for active forms, right? It's used for the perfect active, pluperfect active, future perfect active, or for the perfect active infinitive. So there are no passive forms. So you're not going to need anything looking like that if you're dealing with deponents, which have only passive forms. Notice the rest of these are kind of represented. Woko becomes hortor because that's the passive form of the first person present singular. Wokare becomes hortari because that's the passive infinitive. And wokatum becomes hortata sum because hortata sum is essentially is the same as wokatum, which is the perfect passive participle, but it's also functioning as a reminder that this is I encouraged now. Now this is kind of also taking the place of wokawi, because wokawi was I called, this is I encouraged, because even though it's passive in form, it is active in meaning. All right, so moving on, the last thing I just want to point out is how can I tell that this is first conjugation, this is second conjugation, this is third conjugation, this is fourth conjugation? Pause the video and try and deduce this on your own by looking at it and remembering how we tell how regular verbs, what conjugation regular verbs are from. All right, so here's the tip. Hortari has that A, right? Wokari becomes hortari, so you can recognize that as first conjugation. Wereri, long E, gives it away as second conjugation. No ERE, just I, gives it away as third conjugation, because remember rego, regere. Regere, if I want to say to be ruled instead of to rule, is regi. The whole weak ERE runs away when the strong I shows up. And finally, partiri, we have the fourth conjugation, long I, present in the second principal part. All right, so what would be a great thing to do right now is to pause the video and go to your chapter 8, vocab to learn, in the new chapter, and just try and identify what conjugation each of the deponents in that chapter are. And we'll also give you a chance to start to get used to these, seeing those verbs and thinking about their meanings. All right, moving on. All right, now I just want to throw you into trying to practice these. Remember, all you're really doing is trying to think about what conjugation is each of these words, deponent verbs, and then keeping that in mind, producing the passive form that matches up with the tense of each of these verbs, right? With the tense and person. In order to do this, you probably want to consult Chapter 8 vocabulary if you haven't already done so. All these verbs are going to be taken from in or around there. And I'm actually going to change this to suffer. And with that being said, this last one here is a stretch, so don't worry. You should try it. I would encourage you to try and puzzle it out as a sort of challenge, but don't worry if you can't get it, because there's going to be some elements in here that we haven't talked about. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you to try and do on your own. Pause the video if you want time to do this, because I'm going to move on now and show you the answers. All right, we have followed secuti sumus. So I go sequor, sequi, secutus sum. I know I'm in the perfect, so I just need to put secuti, fourth principal part, plural, sumus, right, because it's perfect. So I know that's we. We have followed. To divide. This one is a little bit easier than that one. It's just the second principal part of partior. I get rid of that. Partior. So yes, so partior, partiri. There you go. Partiri, to divide. Let us talk. Loquamor. This one's a little bit trickier. You have to recognize loquor, loqui. Remind yourself that that is third conjugation, and the subjunctive in the third conjugation present has a. Right? We eat caviar, and so loquamor is let us talk. They were dominating. Dominabantur, right? Just the passive imperfect form, because dominor is a deponent. Then you will suffer, same thing, just a future passive form. And this is just a little bit trickier because the second person singular in the passive was always so weird. I don't know if you guys remember that. But remember, you have ERIS for the third and fourth. You have ERIS in the second person singular present passive, ERIS. And then you have ERIS for the, for the fourth principal part, like audieris, you actually have an IS there, it's easier. But in the third conjugation and third IO conjugation, you have ERIS in the present, and then in the future, the only difference is that you add a macron, because the future is a little bit more complex than the present, is how I like to remember that. So if I want to say you will suffer, it's SN, future, not a bo bis bit future. So we have patieris, and that's you will suffer. Now finally the last one here, we're dealing with a new thing, which is having suffered. Remember, there wasn't a perfect active participle, so normally we've never been able to do having, called, having fought, having sung something, but with deponent verbs, because all their passive forms are active, when we throw out a passive participle, like passus, passa, rather than translating as having been suffered, we know we have to translate it actively, so we translate it having suffered. So we can actually say the queen, having suffered many things, making sure that queen and pasa agree, because pasa is an adjectival verb, a participle. Having suffered many things, we say it like this, right? And we can actually do that. And then we make sure that loquitur is third person singular to agree with our nominative subject, regina, and we're all good to go. All right, I hope this was helpful. No worries if it's a little bit unsure still. It's a great chance for you to review your passive forms if you were a little shaky on them. We're going to have more time to work on this in class. So have a great rest of your day or weekend.